Welcome to the STEM Pathways podcast, where we delve into the fascinating world of science, technology, engineering, and math. I'm your host, Rohan Sharma, a passionate explorer of all things STEM. Each episode, we bring you captivating stories, cutting-edge research, and inspiring interviews with experts and enthusiasts who are pushing the boundaries of innovation. Whether you're a student or professional, or just curious about how the world works, join us as we unlock the mysteries of the universe and explore the endless possibilities of STEM. Let's get started. Today, I'll be interviewing Asir Khan, who holds a Masters and Ph.D. in electrical engineering from Stanford University. How are you doing today?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Rohan. It's been a pleasure to talk to you here. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, no problem. Absolutely, my pleasure.
So to get started, I wanted to ask what made you choose your major of electrical engineering for your bachelor's degree?
So why I choose it?
Mhm.
I think, well, I'll be honest. My father was an electrical engineer, and I always had this passion for electrical engineering, especially with electronics, I would say. Electronic devices and components would fascinate me. And honestly, I think I did not decide to choose electrical engineering until, I always had this knack for going after electrical engineering, but until I got into my undergrad school, Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology, until then I did not really decide. So I was sort of open. And then, I mean, at that time when I was deciding what subjects should I choose for, then that old passion kicked in, and that's how it started. And I think if I see today, yeah, I still like the world of electronics, like variety of electronics, and the topics related to electrical engineering still fascinates me. So yeah.
Yeah. So what was your experience like while getting your bachelor's?
Look, during bachelor's, I think we had a pretty strong program, bachelor's program over there. So that really laid the foundation for different courses, I would say, uh, covering both theory and lab courses. That really helped me later when I say came for my PhD. I realized the curricula over there was like pretty well, very standardized, and I would say the depth was pretty good, not only just in core subject areas, but for example, electrical and electronic engineering can be very broad and vast, right? It can be semiconductor device physics, it can be signal processing, it can be power electronics. And I realized that back then we used to have all sorts of different classes and courses that I believe ultimately laid a very good foundation. And in terms of research back in undergrad, at least in my undergrad school, there was not that much of an experimental research facilities. My research focus was on the semiconductor device physics side. So we used to do a lot of simulations, for example. But those were fun to try things out, how, say, the transport properties in electronic materials and devices would work, how you would think about the physics in nanoelectronic devices. So those are fun to work with. And I think we had a good group of people to get that going. So yeah, I would say overall it was a rich experience in terms of coursework, a lot of projects. So that also, I think, gave me a lot of confidence that, well, if I am doing advanced research in my PhD, no matter what it comes forward, I had that confidence of at least taking the challenge. So can't complain. Yeah, it was a very good experience, I would say, overall.
Yeah. So after you did your bachelor's, you applied over to programs here in the US. What was that process like?
Yeah, so I was looking into applying to US for my PhD directly, right? And I think I applied to 10 different schools across US. Doesn't matter East Coast or West Coast. And during that process, it was all mostly, the application preparation was mostly like writing statements. My reference letters were there, professors who I worked with over there, right? I I by the time I applied, I had a few research publications, so I think that helped me to get into some of the schools here in US. And ultimately, after the submission of the states, for example, you had to submit a statement of purpose, reference letters were provided, and then fill out some of those applications, right? And the important part, I think, was to email some of the professors up here to see if they would be interested in my research direction or vision, or how do they think me as a candidate, to reach out to them ahead of time. And that sort of established some of the connections to these like schools in US for the PhD program. So then I applied, got some interviews in some of the schools. I mean, it's a diverse process, right? In some schools, they interview you. In some schools, they don't need interviews. Some school interviews are central. For example, like at Stanford. Some school, the interview process is not central, like UC Berkeley. And some schools sometimes do not take interviews, so they directly decide based on your applications. So yeah, and then I think after the interviews, basically it's a wait for a couple of weeks, and then the decisions basically start flowing around.
Yeah. So obviously Stanford is Stanford, but was there any specific thing that made you want to choose it for your PhD?
I think, as I said, I wanted to do, I think, let me rephrase this. So I did a lot of simulation back during my undergrad on electronic devices and device physics. I really wanted to do experimental stuff. I mean, when I'm into my PhD. Now, I mean, there can be, I mean, a lot of schools and programs basically have very strong experimental facilities. I think the reason behind choosing Stanford at that time, I was motivated by the diverse research area and collaborative environment at Stanford. So I realized, at least I talked to some professors back then, and I realized that it's a highly collaborative environment here. So it doesn't matter if you're in electrical engineering, bioengineering, neuroscience, or computer science, things can be blended together, and you could ultimately do whatever you want as long as you have that passion. You can make connections. For example, when I applied to Stanford, I think I used to work on device physics, and I had this vision of low power electronics, whether that's for your mobile phone, my laptop, or even low power electronics for healthcare, for example, right? And at Stanford, during that time, there are a number of professors who were doing, say, low power electronics or energy efficient electronics for, say, consumer electronics, right? So making our data storage more efficient, making the transistors more efficient. But at the same time, there are professors who were doing, say, low power brain implants, right? For if I need to have some brain implant to cut out some paralysis and stuff like that, I still need low power circuitry there. So there are a lot of interesting stuff happening. Still, it happens. And I feel like this place could be somewhere I can get in and then collaborate across different departments. So, and I think that happened during my PhD. I collaborated with mechanical engineering, applied physics, electrical engineering was my department, and material science, of course, very heavily. So at least I directly worked with 3 other departments apart from electrical engineering, which I anticipated that to happen, and I'm glad that that happened. But that's sort of the motivation why I chose Stanford back then, if I recall.
Yeah. So getting right into that, what was your PhD research about?
Well, if you ask like my vision and what the core mission of my PhD, that's all electronic materials and devices for energy efficient nanoelectronics. So essentially, I worked with new materials and devices that could bring energy efficiency in our nanoelectronic device components, for example, data storage, memories. And as you can think, our electronic device size is shrinking every day. So your phones are getting smaller, laptops are getting more compact. We need we use more and more data. So from that perspective, nanoelectronic device components are shrinking. But then once you shrink them down for last 50 years, that has been the trend, that you shrink in the two-dimensional horizon and then they get better because smaller size, more compact, more energy efficient. But now, because of all these AI-driven applications, we are at a point where traditional materials, like say single crystal materials and traditional device scaling concepts cannot give you that much of a boost in energy efficiency. And then you run into problem like, say, you are capped by how much GPU you can use, or even if you use that, that consumes a lot of power, right? So we need to address that. So from that perspective, basically my research was all about exploring a new material system that would, say, leverage their transport properties and then use them into nanoelectronic devices to make it low power. And if you think about application perspective, I worked on, as I said, data storage and memory devices for computing. And not only that, so you think about, you have all these electronic components, but you need, say, nanoscale wires or electrical conductors to connect them. So how do we make those conductors more conductive at a very scaled dimension? So those are some of the topics that I explored. I also explored a lot of thermal management issues that can be very prevalent in electronics. For example, my laptop gets very hot if I run, say, a complex program, right? And then how do we manage heat in electronics was also sort of part of my research during my PhD. Yeah, that's sort of the big picture if I want to portray.
Yeah. So after doing your PhD, what made you want to go and do a postdoc?
Well, I think I wanted to do postdoc for two reasons. One, I always wanted to be in academia. I mean, I did two internships in industry during my PhD and I really liked them. But I always wanted to have sort of my own, drive me towards my own research areas and vision and try to do new things. So that sort of that has always kept me motivated to go into academia and be a professor at some school and basically run my own research group at some point. And I thought that, well, postdoc would give me a little bit more training and more matured mentoring experience in terms of, say, how I envision to drive my own research group. And then at the same time, as you know, I was at Stanford doing my PhD. So basically, the postdoc at Berkeley gave me some leverage to explore a separate school, a different environment, and also helped me to understand if I can quickly adjust to the dynamics of a completely different school and how quickly can I do that. That sort of was the motivation that, well, first I want to be in academia, want to run my own research group. Postdoc gives a richer experience from that perspective. It is not always needed, depending on which field you are in, which research area you are in. But I think so far that has been a fruitful experience, I would say, in terms of how you mentor, say, senior PhD students, or even how you work with your postdoc colleagues or, say, your postdoc supervisor. So that has been enlightening, and also changing the school also gave me to explore a complete new school and see myself adjusting to the new environment as quickly as possible, because that's how that's what you would expect yourself when you want to run your own group. There will be a lot of challenges and a lot of different situations where you need to adjust dynamically, right? So I would say that was part of the motivation.
Yeah. So what is this kind of the typical path, I guess, in like this day and age for someone to become a professor?
As I said, it depends on the area, whether you need a postdoc or not. I mean, even in our area, I mean, people have become professors without doing a postdoc. This also depends on your personal choice and, timing and everything. But definitely you need a PhD to get to a good school, basically to be a professor and run your own group, because that gives you the experience and research. Because running your own group, you need your own research vision and own research direction, right? You need your own niche to establish yourself. I'm talking about being a research professor. So there are also positions where you basically can teach, right? You don't really have to do a lot of research, but mostly like teaching loads, or so those positions are called teaching professor positions. So for those, you definitely need to have a lot of teaching experience, like say lecturing experience, and maybe doing a teaching assistantship during your PhDs. But as I said, postdoc is not necessary or not required, but depends on your taste, research area, and personalities, I think.
Yeah. Wait, so my next question, part of it is I was actually talking to someone earlier today, and they were saying that a lot of universities don't like it when their PhD students become a professor at their university. Is that true?
Well, that depends. Let me think. Well, so let me phrase it this way. So my PhD supervisor did his PhD at Stanford, and then he became a professor first at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Then he was there for 6 years, and then he came back to Stanford. So that's how it worked for him, right? But I mean, I see many different schools ultimately. I mean, I don't see an opposition there, but most of the cases, school prefer that they can diversify the professors where they're coming from, right? So if they just go after their own students and own grad students or own postdocs, sometimes the diversity may be missing. So for example, say Stanford. So Stanford, I see at least the trend. They get professors from different schools across the state, right? From East Coast, from West Coast, and whatnot. So in my mind, that makes the pool or the body more diverse, both in terms of culture, in terms of how you think, right? So you say I grew up at Stanford culture, so I would think probably in a certain way at that time. And then if I continue to be there, I know the environment, I know how people talk here and how people collaborate, right? Now, if I come from maybe a different school where maybe the environment is not as collaborative as that could be at Stanford, that's a different experience for me. But having me at Stanford is a different experience for Stanford itself. So you see where I'm coming from. So that's why I guess schools sometimes prefer that just not their own students, but PhDs and postdocs from, and even professors from different school basically move to different places.
Yeah. And then I guess the next part of that question is, do you have any places in mind of places you would like to be a professor?
Well, I would say whoever gives me the opportunity to basically do what I want to do, I would be. So for me, I think it is most important to be happy in terms of my research direction and research goal. So say I have a vision, what I want to do, and I sort of know what I need to make that happen, in a sense that say research facilities is very important. Say if I am an experimentalist, I need say nanofabrication facilities, right? I make electronic devices, I need a lot of measurement and testing capabilities. I play with new materials, I need material deposition tools. And depending on where I can leverage those things better and where I can see my peers collaborating at different parts, I would prefer schools like that. And that can be any school. I won't name any particular school, but as long as I can leverage these facilities, and basically be happy with my group. I think that would be my sort of dream school.
Yeah. So, also one thing I wanted to ask, I've always heard about the kind of PhD slash postdoc culture of like overworking but loving it. Um, how true is that for you?
Well, I think for me, I would think that it was pretty balanced. It's not like a balance like you start working at your lab at 9 a.m. and then get it done by 5 p.m. But rather, I would say that I really enjoyed the flexibility. I understand that it can vary from school to school, research group to research group. But I think during my PhD and even right now in my postdoc, I really enjoy the flexibility that I can get my work done any time of the day and any day of the week. And if I want to take a break, I can take a break at any given day of the week. So I I can say I worked on the weekends, but maybe during a weekday I'm by the beach. So enjoying there, right? So I think work life for me, you make your own work life balance. In academia, there is a saying that there is no work life balance, but basically, you have to get the job done, or you would try to get the job done, but it doesn't mean that you need to basically, um, basically you can't uh, pursue your hobby, for example, right? So you have to manage your own timing, for example, manage your own health, and that's how, at least for me, that's how it worked. And I would say I was lucky to enjoy that culture where, as I said, I mean, maybe in some weeks I worked really, really hard, produced a lot of data. And some weeks I was just staying at home, thinking about like reading maybe new papers and writing stuff, right? And then maybe I was completely out of the town for a week or so. So I think the PhD postdoc culture can, as I said, again, the disclaimer is that it can depend or it can vary from school to school, especially group to group, like research group to research group. Like every group has their own research culture, maybe even department to department, right? But I think if you and I would stress that this is a stressful task, is because you are not sure about your ultimate outcome, right? So PhD, you start with something, the research can go right or go wrong, and you never know. You are trying for something, right? But you never know if that experiment is going to work out. You plan for it, but you cannot control it, right?
Yeah.
So basically, it's a lot of trial and error at some phases. So that might throw people off. And I mean, we talk about, say, depression, this and that, being exhausted. So that's for real. But as I said, I think in my mind, I think it is possible that you still manage your hobbies, you still manage your time, set yourself some time to enjoy that. I mean, for me, I think the biggest motivation was that if I used to celebrate, or even still I do today, very small successes, meaning, say, I got maybe one good data after 1 week of trial. I would celebrate that. I would enjoy that moment, and that would keep me happy without thinking that, well, where is my next data coming from, or how am I implementing my next experiment? I will work for it, but I will celebrate the moment. And I think that kept me sort of going.
Yeah. So, I actually talked to someone who's currently a PhD student at Stanford in electrical engineering, and she
Great.
basically said the exact same thing. How you can choose your schedule, which can be very flexible. I guess some people do choose to have those crazy schedules. And right after my podcast, she said she had to help one of her friends with some research at 9 p.m. So,
Yeah, so here's the thing, right? So you, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation, like for this particular conversation, that, well, it's not a job where you do go to lab at 9 a.m. and come back at 5 p.m. You can do that. there is no one like holding you to do that, and that's completely fine. But as I said, the flexibility part, that you probably start your experiment at maybe like you can start your thing at 2 p.m. and then get it done at 9 p.m. That's up to you. At least that's what I experienced.
Mhm.
And you basically manage your own time as long as you can get the job done. I think in most of the cases, your PI, meaning the professor who is running the group, should be happy as long as you are having your progress, right? Or at least you are trying to achieve that progress, because progress is not uh, guaranteed, right?
Yeah.
It can be months before you can get any meaningful result, but that's what research is. That's what PhD is. So yeah.
Yeah. So to end off, I wanted to ask if you have one piece of advice for someone who's still in high school or early in college wanting to follow a similar career path as you.
Well, I would say enjoy your life and enjoy what basically try to do what you enjoy yourself to do, and celebrate small moments of success. We know, so you would always think of a bigger picture, bigger goal, and then you'd set say crazy goals that I need to do that, I need to get that PhD, or I need to do a postdoc or whatever. But I think it is important to realize that if we celebrate those small moments, uh, things can, things can be boosted up. Yeah, and it becomes very powerful in a collective sense. And the other thing I would say that drive your own passion. Don't get bothered by what your peers are doing. So don't feel pressurized by that. As long as you know what you are doing, and you are listening to your passion, I think that is very useful in the long run. And then basically talk to people, listen to or see what people are doing, listen to them, but don't get fully biased. I think that way you can have your both mental peace and focused vision.
Yeah. All right, then. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Rohan. It was great chatting with you.